Blood was pooling on the linoleum of my underground clinic when the most terrifying man I'd ever seen grabbed my wrist. His skin was ice, his eyes a piercing, inhuman crimson. I stitched him together and prayed I'd never see him again. 12 hours later, his men kicked my door down. Dr. Clara Bennett was not a stranger to gunshot wounds, knife gashes, or the desperate, terrified faces of people who couldn't afford to step foot inside a legal hospital. Since losing her medical license 3 years ago, the unjust casualty of a massive pharmaceutical cover-up at New York Presbyterian, Clara had operated out of a reinforced basement in Hell's Kitchen. It was a cash-only, no-questions-asked sanctuary for the city's forgotten. But nothing in her extensive trauma experience could have prepared her for the torrential storm of a Tuesday night when her reinforced steel door was nearly ripped off its hinges. The clock on the wall read 2:14 a.m. The rain outside was coming down in sheets, drowning out the sirens that usually served as the neighborhood's lullaby. Clara had just finished sterilizing her instruments when the door burst open. 3 men entered, bringing the storm in with them. They didn't look like her usual clientele of gang members or desperate runaways. They wore bespoke, rain-soaked Armani suits that cost more than Clara's annual rent. But it was the man they were carrying between them that commanded every ounce of the room's gravity. "Clear the table! Now!" barked the tallest of the 3, a man with striking, pale features and an accent that clipped the edges of standard British English. We will later know him as Declan Reed. Clara didn't argue. The sheer volume of blood soaking through the wounded man's ruined silk shirt was alarming. "Lay him down gently. What's the mechanism of injury?" she demanded, snapping on a pair of thick nitrile gloves. They hoisted the man onto the steel examination table. As the harsh fluorescent lights hit his face, Clara's breath caught in her throat. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp aristocratic cheekbones and raven-black hair plastered to his forehead. But his skin was completely devoid of color, a translucent porcelain white that belonged in a morgue, not on a living patient. A laceration, left pectoral, glancing the thoracic cavity, Declan said smoothly, his eyes darting around the clinic, assessing the exits. "You will treat him, and you will forget his face. If you fail at either, you won't live to see the sunrise." Clara ignored the threat. She grabbed a pair of trauma shears and cut away the ruined silk fabric. What she saw made her medical mind short-circuit. The wound wasn't a standard stab or gunshot. It was a jagged, horrific tear, resembling a claw mark. But worse, the edges of the laceration were sizzling. A faint, sickening hiss echoed in the quiet room, and the tissue was actively necrotizing before her eyes, emitting a strange, acrid smoke that smelled like ozone and burning copper. "What in God's name is this?" Clara muttered, reaching for a saline flush. "Do not touch the wound with your bare skin," Declan warned sharply, stepping forward. "It's a synthetic compound, highly corrosive. Flush it, remove the necrotic tissue, and stitch the muscle wall. Quickly." Clara worked on pure instinct. As she began to irrigate the wound, she glanced at the monitors she had hastily hooked up to the patient. The EKG machine let out a confused, erratic beep. His heart rate was astonishingly slow, barely 20 beats per minute. His core temperature read a fatal 68 degrees Fahrenheit. By all biological metrics, the man on her table was a corpse. Yet his chest rose and fell in shallow, agonizing breaths. She took a scalpel and began debriding the sizzling, ruined flesh. Whatever had cut him had left behind a glowing, silver-like residue that fought her at every turn. It took an agonizing 45 minutes of meticulous, nerve-shredding surgery to clear the contamination. Throughout the entire agonizing process, the man didn't so much as flinch, no anesthesia, no pain response, as Clara finally drew the heavy silk sutures tight, closing the muscle and skin. A sudden, terrifying shift occurred in the room. The air pressure dropped. The man on the table snapped his eyes open. Clara froze, the needle driver suspended in her hand. His eyes were not human. They were a deep, luminescent crimson, predatory and ancient. For a fraction of a second, as his lips parted in a sharp intake of breath, she saw them. Two elongated, impossibly sharp canines. Fangs. Before her rational mind could process the impossibility, his hand shot out with the speed of a striking viper. He clamped his icy, iron-grip fingers around her wrist. The coldness of his skin burned straight through her gloves. He stared at her, his crimsoner gaze burning into her soul, mapping every detail of her face. He didn't speak, but the intensity of his stare felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. Then his eyes rolled back, and he slipped into unconsciousness. Declan immediately stepped in, shoving a thick stack of $100 bills onto the medical tray, easily $50,000. "You did well, Doctor," Declan said, his voice stripped of its previous panic, replaced with a chilling calm. "He will heal from here. Remember our agreement." You saw nothing. Within seconds, the three men hoisted the unconscious stranger off the table and vanished into the stormy night, leaving Clara standing alone in a clinic that smelled of ozone, old blood, and impossible secrets. She stared at the monitors, then at the blood-stained gauze, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "Monsters," she whispered to the empty room. "I just performed surgery on a monster." For 48 hours, Clara tried to convince herself she had hallucinated the red eyes. She blamed the late hour, the stress, the flickering fluorescent lights. She scrubbed her clinic from top to bottom, deposited the $50,000 in a secure offshore account she kept for emergencies, and tried to resume her life. But she couldn't shake the phantom chill of his grip on her wrist. On Thursday evening, Clara was locking the heavy deadbolts of her clinic, preparing to head to her small apartment in Queens. She turned around and found the narrow, dimly lit alleyway completely blocked. 3 matte black SUVs idled silently in the rain. Before Clara could even reach into her coat pocket for the pepper spray she always carried, 4 men stepped out of the shadows. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized grace that no human security detail possessed. Leading them was Declan. He was dressed flawlessly, holding a sleek black umbrella. "Dr. Bennett," Declan said, his voice echoing in the damp alley. "I apologize for the abruptness of this visit, but my employer is awake, and he has made a very specific request." Clara backed up against her reinforced door, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't do house calls. I told you the transaction is finished. You paid me. I kept my mouth shut." Declan offered a polite, utterly lifeless smile. "I'm afraid it wasn't a request, Doctor." He ordered, "Bring me that woman." And we do not disobey the king. "The king?" Clara thought wildly. Before she could scream for help, one of the enforcers was behind her. A cold, damp cloth was pressed over her nose and mouth. The sharp, chemical scent of chloroform filled her lungs. She fought, kicking and scratching, but the man holding her felt like a statue carved from granite. Within seconds, the dark alley faded into absolute blackness. When Clara opened her eyes, she was no longer in the grimy underbelly of Hell's Kitchen. She was sitting on a plush velvet sofa in a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, placing her somewhere in the upper stratosphere of a billionaire's row skyscraper. A crackling fire burned in a massive black marble fireplace. "Forgive the theatrics of your arrival," a deep, velvet-smooth voice resonated from the shadows near the window. "My men are severely lacking in nuance." Clara bolted upright, her head spinning slightly from the sedative. She scrambled to her feet, putting the sofa between herself and the voice. Stepping out of the shadows was her midnight patient. He looked entirely different. The blood and vulnerability were gone. He wore a tailored charcoal grey suit that hugged his broad shoulders perfectly. His raven hair was styled, and his skin, while still unnervingly pale, now held a dangerous, vibrant energy. His eyes were no longer glowing crimson. They were a dark, endless obsidian that seemed to swallow the light around them. "Who are you?" Clara demanded, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands were shaking. "What is this?" "My name is Alistair Croft," he said, walking slowly toward her. His movements were completely silent. Not a footstep, not a rustle of fabric. "And you, Dr. Clara Bennett, possess a very dangerous secret. Not only do you know what I am, but you successfully neutralized a poison that was designed to turn my immortal blood to ash." Clara swallowed hard. "I'm a doctor. I treated a wound. Now let me go, or You'll what?" Alistair asked, a dark, amused smirk playing on his lips. He closed the distance between them in a blur of motion so fast Clara's eyes couldn't track it. Suddenly, he was inches from her face. She could feel the icy cold radiating off his body, but ironically, she could also smell a faint trace of bergamot and expensive cedar on him. "You can't go to the police, Clara." "They don't govern my kind," Alistair murmured, looking down at her. "I rule a syndicate that has operated beneath the surface of this city for 3 centuries. The weapon used against me 2 nights ago was laced with a synthetic variant of liquid UV and colloidal silver. It was an inside job, a coup attempt by a rival faction." "Why do I care?" Clara snapped, surprising herself with her own defiance. "Let your vampire mafia handle it." Alistair's eyes darkened, leaning in closer. "Because, Dr. Bennett, that poison is hyper-reactive. Any human who comes into unprotected contact with it, even breathing its vapor, suffers immediate, fatal pulmonary edema. Yet you leaned over my bleeding chest, inhaled the fumes, and touched the residue with minimal barrier protection." Clara frowned, her medical brain overriding her fear. "I wore nitrile gloves. Nitrile melts on contact with this compound," Alistair interrupted softly. He reached out, his long, cold fingers gently tracing the edge of her wrist, right where he had grabbed her 2 nights ago. "I saw the gloves melt into your skin. I saw the poison touch your bare flesh. And yet here you are, breathing, your heart beating a perfect, defiant rhythm." Clara pulled her arm away, her mind racing. It was true. After they had left, she noticed chemical burns on her wrists where the gloves had dissolved, but they had healed within hours, leaving only a faint red mark. She had assumed it was just a mild, abrasive reaction. "Your blood profile, Dr. Bennett, is an anomaly," Alistair continued, turning to walk toward a sleek mahogany desk. He picked up a thick manila folder and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. "Null. The golden blood. But there is something else in your genetic makeup. A mutation. Your blood naturally produces an enzyme that neutralizes the very weapon designed to exterminate my kind. Clara stared at the medical file. Her medical file. You hacked my records. I own the hospital that fired you, Alistair corrected effortlessly. I know everything about you, Clara. I know you take the fall for others. I know you hide in the dark to save people the light has abandoned. But right now, you are the most valuable asset in my world. Asset? Clara echoed, her anger finally burning through the terror. I am not a piece of medical equipment for your turf war. Alistair turned back to her, the obsidian in his eyes flashing crimson for a fleeting second. The raw power radiating from him was intoxicating and terrifying. The faction that tried to kill me knows that I survived, Alistair said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate whisper. They know someone saved me. It is only a matter of time before they find your little clinic. When they do, they won't ask questions. They will tear you apart. Clara's breath hitched. She thought of her clinic, the sanctuary she had built with her bare hands. I didn't bring you here to imprison you, Clara, Alistair said softly, stepping into her personal space once more. He reached out, tipping her chin up, so she was forced to look into his ancient, mesmerizing eyes. I brought you here because you belong to me now. By right of blood, you saved the king. And the king protects what is his. From this moment on, your life is intertwined with mine. Welcome to the underworld, Doctor. For the next 3 weeks, Clara's world was confined to the top 3 floors of the Croft Tower in Tribeca. Alistair hadn't lied. He didn't lock her in a dungeon. Instead, he built her a gilded cage equipped with a state-of-the-art hematology lab that would make the researchers at Mount Sinai weep with envy. Her days were spent running endless assays on her own blood, trying to isolate the exact polypeptide chain that made her immune to the synthetic UV silver compound. Her nights, however, were spent locked in a dangerous, intoxicating dance with the Vampire King. Alistair was an enigma. He was ruthless to his subordinates, orchestrating the systematic dismantling of his enemies from a bank of encrypted monitors. Yet, when he stepped into her lab, the apex predator softened into a captivating patron. He would bring her rare medical texts, vintage vinyl records, and on one occasion, a perfectly brewed macchiato from a small cash-only cafe in Greenwich Village she had casually mentioned missing. You are working too hard, Doctor, Alistair murmured one evening, materializing behind her chair with his trademark, terrifying silence. Clara jumped, dropping her pipette. Do you have to do that? A simple clearing of the throat would suffice. Alistair chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent a treacherous shiver down Clara's spine. He leaned over her shoulder, his proximity dropping the ambient temperature, wrapping her in the scent of bergamot and cold night air. His long, pale fingers brushed against her collarbone as he inspected the data on her monitor. I've isolated the enzyme, Clara said, trying to ignore the way her pulse spiked under his gaze. It's a rare mutation of the RHD gene, combined with a unique protein folding structure. My blood doesn't just neutralize the poison, Alistair. It acts as a catalyst. If I reverse engineer this enzyme, I can create a serum that would grant you temporary immunity. Alistair's obsidian eyes flashed. He turned her chair slowly, so she was forced to look up at him. You could give me the ability to walk in the sun? To withstand their greatest weapon? Theoretically, Clara breathed, captivated by the raw hunger in his expression. But I need the original formula of the poison to synthesize the counteragent perfectly. Without it, I'm just guessing in the dark. The heavy mahogany doors to the lab swung open before Alistair could reply. Declan strode in, his tailored suit immaculate, but his jaw was clenched with barely contained fury. We intercepted a data packet from the Graves Syndicate, Declan reported, not sparing Clara a glance. Dominic Graves was the leader of the rogue faction, a brutal younger vampire who believed humans were nothing more than cattle and that Alistair's rule was too lenient. We know who synthesized the UV silver compound for Dominic. "Show me," Alistair commanded, his voice dropping to a glacial, authoritative register. Declan handed over a sleek, encrypted tablet. As Alistair read the file, his expression remained perfectly neutral, but the glass beaker on Clara's workstation suddenly shattered into dust from the sheer atmospheric pressure of his rage. Alistair slowly turned the tablet to face Clara. "Do you know this man?" Clara stared at the high-resolution surveillance photo, and the blood drained from her face. Staring back at her was a man in his late 50s, with thinning grey hair and a bespoke lab coat. It was Dr. Arthur Pendleton, her former chief of surgery at New York Presbyterian. The man who had framed her for the lethal pharmaceutical trials, stripped her of her license, and ruined her life. "Arthur," Clara whispered, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. He's a brilliant biochemist, but he's completely devoid of a moral compass. If Dominic Graves offered him enough money and lab space, Arthur would build a weapon to kill God. "He didn't just build the weapon," Declan interjected coldly. "The intercepted comms indicate Pendleton is the one who tipped Graves off about your unique blood type. Pendleton kept your medical records from the hospital. He knows you are the only one who can cure the king, and he has put a $10 million bounty on your head." The room spun. The man who had destroyed her professional life was now actively trying to end her physical one. Alistair stepped forward, eclipsing the harsh laboratory lights. He gently cupped Clara's face in his freezing hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. The obsidian was gone, replaced entirely by that terrifying, ancient crimson. "Listen to me," Alistair vowed, his voice a lethal promise. "Pendleton will not touch you. Dominic Graves will burn. But I have to move tonight to dismantle their primary compound in the meatpacking district. You will stay here. The penthouse is sealed, reinforced with titanium and UV-plated glass. No one comes in or out." Clara grabbed his wrists. She wasn't entirely sure if she was trying to push him away or hold him closer. "Alistair, if Pendleton is there, don't kill him immediately. Bring me his hard drives. I need his research to finish the cure." Alistair's lips curved into a dark, devastating smile. Spoken like a true queen of the underworld. He leaned down, pressing a cold, shockingly tender kiss to her forehead. "Lock the doors, Declan. If anything happens to her, I will leave you to the sun." The silence in the penthouse was suffocating. It was 3 a.m. Alistair and his elite guard had been gone for 2 hours. Clara sat in the lab, staring at the shattered remains of her beaker, unable to shake the overwhelming sense of dread coiling in her gut. Something was wrong. Pendleton was meticulous. He wouldn't hide his primary research in a known stronghold like the meatpacking district. He was a coward who always kept a back door open. Suddenly, the power in the penthouse died. The hum of the servers, the glow of the city through the windows, the security monitors, everything went pitch black. A second later, the dull red glow of the emergency backup lights flickered on, casting long, bloody shadows across the sleek marble floors. Clara's phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number. "Checkmate, Doctor." Before she could process the message, a massive explosion shook the building. The reinforced titanium doors to the lab didn't break, but the specialized UV-plated glass of the outer hallway shattered inward with a deafening roar. They hadn't attacked the door. They had scaled the outside of the 90-story skyscraper. Declan! Clara yelled, backing away from the entrance and grabbing the heaviest object she could find, a solid steel centrifuge rotor. There was no answer. Heavy, terrifyingly fast footsteps echoed down the hall. The lab doors were wrenched open, the biometric locks completely short-circuited. Standing in the doorway was a man who moved with the same fluid, unnatural grace as Alistair, but his eyes were a sickly, jaundiced yellow. Dominic Graves. Behind him stood 3 heavily armed mercenaries, and cowering in their shadow was Dr. Arthur Pendleton. Well, well, Dominic purred, stepping into the lab. He sniffed the air, a grotesque smile stretching across his pale face. The little miracle worker. I must admit, Dr. Bennett, you caused quite the headache for my operation. Reviving Alistair was a bold move for a mortal. Clara. Pendleton stepped forward, adjusting his glasses nervously. Don't fight them. Just come with us quietly. Dominic wants your blood, but I've convinced him to keep you alive. We can do great things together. We can change the evolutionary hierarchy of this city. You cowardly son of a bitch, Clara spat, her grip tightening on the heavy steel rotor. You destroyed my life to cover your own tracks, and now you're playing lapdog to a parasite. Dominic laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Feisty. I like that. Grab her. Drain her just enough to pacify her, then bag her. We need to leave before Alistair realizes the meat-packing warehouse was a decoy. 2 mercenaries lunged forward. Clara didn't hesitate. She threw the massive steel rotor straight at the first mercenary's knees, hearing a satisfying crunch as he went down. But the second mercenary was too fast. He grabbed her by the hair, violently yanking her backward. Dominic stepped closer, his fangs descending, his yellow eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Such sweet, defiant blood. Let's have a taste. As Dominic leaned in, his jaw unhinging, Clara's hand scrambled desperately across her workstation. Her fingers brushed against a rack of syringes she had prepared earlier. Syringes filled with her synthesized, reverse-engineered catalyst. It wasn't the cure. It was the volatile prototype that acted as an accelerant to the UV silver poison. If my blood acts as an enzyme, Clara thought wildly, let's see how he digests it. With a scream of pure adrenaline, Clara drove her elbow into her captor's ribs, breaking his hold just enough to free her right arm. She snatched the syringe, ripped the cap off with her teeth, and as Dominic lunged for her throat, she drove the 3-inch needle directly into his jugular, slamming the plunger down. Dominic froze. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then a horrific, gurgling scream tore from Dominic's throat. His veins turned a glowing, toxic silver beneath his translucent skin. The synthetic enzyme reacted violently with his immortal biology. He stumbled backward, clawing at his neck as smoke began to pour from his eyes and mouth. "What did you do?" Pendleton shrieked, scrambling backward as the vampire lord dissolved into a heap of burning, necrotic ash right before his eyes. The mercenaries, witnessing their invincible leader turn to dust in seconds, dropped their weapons in sheer terror. Before they could even turn to run, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling. Alistair had returned. He didn't just kill the mercenaries, he eradicated them. It was a blur of brutal, visceral violence that lasted less than 5 seconds. When he stopped moving, the room was eerily silent, save for the whimpering of Arthur Pendleton, who was backed into a corner, completely soaked in sweat. Alistair stood amidst the carnage, his suit ruined, his chest heaving. His glowing crimson eyes locked onto Clara. He scanned her from head to toe, searching for any sign of injury. Seeing her unharmed, but panting heavily with the empty syringe still in her hand, the feral tension bled out of his posture. I told you, Alistair murmured, his voice thick with a terrifying mix of awe and possessive pride. Spoken like a true queen. He turned his gaze slowly to Pendleton. The disgraced doctor fell to his knees, sobbing. Please, Pendleton begged, raising his hands. I have the formula. I have the research. I can give it to you. Just let me live. Alistair didn't even look at him. He walked over to Clara, stepping carefully over the ashes of his fallen rival. He reached out, gently taking the empty syringe from her trembling fingers, and pulled her flush against his cold, hard chest. Dr. Bennett, Alistair whispered into her hair, his arms locking around her in an unbreakable embrace. What is your medical opinion on the fate of this traitor? Clara looked over Alistair's shoulder at the man who had ruined her life. She thought of the cold, damp clinic in Hell's Kitchen. She thought of the fear, the disgrace, the nights spent wondering how she would pay rent. Then she looked up into Alistair's ancient, mesmerizing eyes. She wasn't a disgraced doctor anymore. She was the woman who held the lifeblood of the underworld in her veins. Take his research, Clara said coldly, her voice echoing in the ruined laboratory. And then, Alistair, tear him apart. Alistair's dark smile was the last thing Arthur Pendleton ever saw. In the aftermath, as the ashes settled and the empire of the night shifted irreversibly under their feet, Alistair Croft claimed his throne. But he did not sit upon it alone. Dr. Clara Bennett, the mortal who had cured the king's wounds and weaponized her own blood, stood flawlessly by his side. The underworld had a new ruler, and she wore a white coat stained with the ashes of her enemies. If your heart was pounding during Clara and Alistair's deadly dance, you won't want to miss our next dark romance thriller. Hit that like button. Share this gripping tale with your fellow vampire romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-stopping, blood-pumping stories delivered straight to your feed. What would you do if you discovered you had the golden blood? Let us know in the comments below.